Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm revisiting a category that I haven't looked at for a long time, affordable ultrawides. A lot of the focus these days is on high-end ultrawides with premium OLED panels, but those monitors are also pretty expensive, starting at around $600 to $700 US. What if you only have half that amount to spend? Well, that's where the Dell Alienware AW3425DWM comes in. The AW3425DWM is a 34-inch 3440 by 1440 ultrawide using a VA LCD panel which tops out at 180Hz. It has a 1500R curvature, it supports adaptive sync, it uses the latest Alienware design, and it's priced at just $350 US right now. Now, VA panels of this resolution and refresh rate have been around for a while, so I'm not expecting to see groundbreaking advancements, but I'm definitely curious to see what you get at this price point if you specifically want the ultrawide format. From a design perspective, the DWM looks very similar to Dell's flagship ultrawide model, the AW3425DW. That model uses a QD-OLED panel and is a little thinner overall, but the rest of the design is basically the same. Great news for the lower cost variant. That's because this updated 2025 Alienware design is excellent, it looks great, the build quality is fantastic, and what you get overall is of a high-end quality. The rear is nice and minimalist, the stand pillar is pleasingly rounded, and the base is a smallish square that's flat, which maximizes usable desk space. One thing to be aware of is that most of the outer plastic surfaces are colored in what Dell calls interstellar indigo, aka deep blue. Sometimes Dell's marketing images make the 3425DWM look black, but in reality it's a blue tinted black. I think it looks great, but of course it will depend on what your setup looks like overall. The stand is sturdy and supports height, tilt and swivel adjustment. The maximum level of height on offer is acceptable. On the front we get the 1500R curved panel, which is a perfectly acceptable and normal curve for this size of screen. The panel itself has a matte finish, the usual sort of thing you see on many LCDs. It does a decent job of diffusing light and preventing direct reflections, and the level of grain is standard, so clarity is still pretty good. The port selection includes two HDMI 2.1 ports and one DisplayPort 1.4, along with a 2-port USB 5 Gbps hub. Both of these ports are along the bottom edge of the display for easy access. The DisplayPort uses DSC to achieve 10-bit 180Hz, but can still run at 8-bit 180Hz with DSC disabled. The HDMI port has 48 Gbps of bandwidth and also supports 10-bit 180Hz, but without DSC. It's great to see full bandwidth support over HDMI, with older HDMI 2.0 models being limited to just 100Hz. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle on the bottom edge of the monitor below the Alienware logo. It includes Dell's usual interface and a good range of features, including color controls, a timer, refresh rate display, shadow boosting, and Alien Vision, which gives you access to crosshairs and other image manipulation modes. It's a competitive feature set with no obvious omissions or issues. With the AW3425DWM using a VA LCD panel, the performance of this monitor is going to be interesting to explore. VA is not known to be overly fast in terms of transition times, but optimization is improving over the years, so let's take a look. The first of the three overdrive settings is fast, and at 180Hz performance is not amazing. The average response time is 11.2 milliseconds, and while there is no overshoot, dark smearing is problematic, with an average dark transition time of 18 milliseconds. If you increase the mode to super fast, the response average improves by about 1 millisecond, but we're still short of decent refresh compliance. Dark smearing is still visible, and cumulative deviation is not amazing. The fastest overdrive setting is extreme, and what's interesting about this configuration is that it's not that much faster than the slowest setting. The response time average has improved to 8.8 milliseconds, however we still get noticeable dark smearing, and cumulative deviation has only improved to 621. That's just 12% better than the fast overdrive mode, and visually, it's very difficult to spot the difference between fast, super fast, and extreme. The response time average on offer here is only borderline acceptable for 180Hz gaming, though it's fine for 144Hz. For adaptive sync gamers, the best mode to use is Extreme, which holds a similar level of performance across most of the refresh rate range. At 120Hz, the panel is slightly faster, and the response time average continues to improve down to 60Hz, though this comes with an increase in overshoot. While you can turn down the overdrive setting to avoid inverse ghosting at lower refresh rates, super fast is recommended, Extreme is still acceptable around 60Hz, and inverse ghosting is not especially noticeable. You'll also spot that dark smearing is much less problematic at lower refresh rates, as overall panel performance improves at lower refreshes. So there's a couple of things going on here. The good news is that adaptive sync gaming is quite nice on this panel, as you're getting close to a single overdrive mode experience, and performance at lower refresh rates is decent. The bad news is that overall panel speed is not especially fast. 180Hz is really pushing it for this panel type, and classic VA dark smearing is visible at higher refreshes. Let's compare this to other monitors, and I've included here some displays we tested many years ago to see how the AW3425DWM shapes up as a more modern option. In positive news, an average response of 8.8 milliseconds is mid-range for a VA LCD, so this isn't an exceptionally slow screen. It's faster than products like the Samsung Odyssey G5, Xiaomi Mi Curved, and Gigabyte G34WQC. However, it's not as fast as some of the better tuned VAs in this chart, such as the Scepter 165Hz model and newer mini LEDs like the AOC Q27G40XMN. I've also included some IPS LCD options like the Gigabyte M34WQ and LG34GN850, as IPS Ultrawides are still available at some retailers. Both of these are faster screens, which isn't a huge surprise given the advantage IPS typically has over VA in response times. Here are the cumulative deviation results at the highest refresh rate. The DWM isn't bad here, coming in at the higher end of the VA LCD pack, but it's still within the typical VA zone. The Gigabyte M34WQ using an IPS LCD is slightly better, for example, and then newer LCDs in other formats are faster again. On average across the refresh rate range, the DWM fares better. It's not quite as well optimized as the Q27G40XMN, but it's not far off in overall speed, and this is the best ultrawide VA I've tested. With that said, performance is not amazing compared to modern IPS LCDs or even older models like the LG34GN850, so for variable refresh gaming, you shouldn't expect the clearest results. In average cumulative deviation, again, the DWM is pretty good as far as VA LCDs go, achieving 683 on average, a similar level to the Q27G3XMN that we've recommended. However, modern IPS LCDs typically fall in the 500 to 600 range, and even budget 1440p models like the MSI 275QF are capable of this. So it's fair to say this VA ultrawide is slower than a typical IPS LCD and on the slow side for a 2025 monitor, but it's up to 20% better in this metric than some of the older VA ultrawides that I've tested. As I mentioned earlier, dark smearing is a problem on this monitor, and results are typical, with a 14 millisecond dark average. Again, not the worst result, since I have tested some monitors that have a dark average of around 20 milliseconds, but it's also not the best. The AOC Q27G40XMN is an example of a newer VA LCD that is better tuned to minimize dark smearing, and then of course we have the Samsung Odyssey line, which tends to have the best dark performance in the 16:9 models. This is a known flaw of VA LCDs, it's just something you have to put up with when purchasing this sort of display. 120Hz performance is perfectly fine, it's on the slow side compared to IPS LCDs, but better than the average VA ultrawide. At 60Hz, again a mid-table result, which is better than average for a VA LCD, but it falls short of modern IPS offerings. Input lag is normal, with a processing delay of about 1 millisecond and a normal ultrawide LCD refresh rate of 180Hz. Most models today are either 165 or 180Hz. The 180Hz models have a slight responsiveness advantage as the refresh rate is 9% higher, but we're not talking about anything significant, and I certainly don't believe the difference between 180 and 165Hz is large enough to pay a premium for. The main issue with input lag on this display is the slow transition times, especially in darker content. Power consumption, normal, with the AW3425DWM using slightly less power than other VA LCD ultrawides. This is a pretty efficient panel technology overall, with lower power consumption than OLEDs while gaming. The DWM is a wide gamut monitor, sporting 95% coverage of DCI-P3, which is a typical level these days among gaming displays. This equates to 73% coverage of Rec 2020, basically the same as other IPS and VA ultrawides. Occasionally, you see sRGB-only monitors like the Samsung Odyssey G5, but for the most part, wide gamut is the norm. By default, the DWM has decent accuracy, with solid adherence to sRGB or 2.2 gamma, and a good grayscale delta E. The display does not use sRGB emulation out of the box, so there is some oversaturation affecting the color results, which is typical among gaming monitors. Many of you seem to like this oversaturation effect though. Compared to other monitors, factory results are very solid for grayscale, coming towards the top of the charts. Color checker results are mid-table, standard for a gaming monitor. The DWM works relatively well with Windows 11 auto color management. With OS level gamut emulation enabled, oversaturation is reduced, and overall color performance is good for sRGB work. It's not quite at the level of proper factory calibration, but good enough, especially as this configuration does not lock OSD settings, so you can tweak things further. There's also a built-in sRGB mode, which locks some settings like white balance. Grayscale performance in this mode is similar to the default mode, but saturation is much improved with proper sRGB emulation. It still falls short of what I consider proper factory calibration with a color checker delta E average of 6.5, but the mode is usable. When we compare these results to other displays, the DWM sits in the middle of the table, offering a good but not outstanding level of accuracy. There are definitely much worse displays that I've tested, so it's good to see Dell avoid the bad zone, though the sRGB mode is not as tight as you'd see from, say, their flagship QD-OLED Ultrawides. Calibration can be improved through a full software ICC profile, which I created using CalMan. The results here are very good thanks to a wide color gamut and decent factory gamma performance, so this is a great candidate for calibration like this. Maximum SDR brightness is strong at 462 nits, which is a little brighter than the typical VA ultrawides that I've tested previously, and more than enough for most use cases. Minimum brightness is very good at 41 nits, so there's a great range of brightness on offer. As this display uses a VA LCD panel, the native contrast ratio is high among the LCD pack. The DWM isn't a standout, with many VAs reporting in with around a 4000:1 contrast ratio, but this is nevertheless a very good result that improves black depth, something that's especially noticeable in darker rooms. The level of contrast on offer is much higher than IPS LCDs and is one of the primary reasons to get a VA LCD. You'll see a result 4 times higher than the Gigabyte M34WQ that uses an IPS panel. The trade-off to some degree is viewing angles, which aren't amazing on a VA LCD. Horizontally, this is partially mitigated by the curve. The edges of the screen are brought in slightly, and this helps to hide issues relating to horizontal viewing angles. Vertically though, you do need to optimize this screen so you're looking at it dead on, as there's some gamma shift at off angles. My unit's uniformity was pretty good, with no obvious issues. This is a standard LCD result, with a slight amount of fall off along the edges. Before getting into the essentials checklist, I want to make brief mention of this panel's HDR capabilities. While Dell advertised this as Display HDR 400 certified, the display's hardware is poorly suited to HDR. There's just 8 edge-lit dimming zones, which is inadequate for displaying the sorts of contrast that makes HDR content shine. Such a small zone count leads to extreme blooming and raised blacks in most HDR scenes, which looks terrible and isn't a substantial upgrade over the SDR mode running at a high brightness level. If you were at all interested in HDR, you should not consider the AW3425DWM. Outside of HDR, Dell do a reasonable job of advertising this monitor, getting most of the key specifications correct. Response time performance is exaggerated because Dell believe the extreme mode provides a 1 millisecond greater gray response, which is only possible in the best cases. The name AW3425DWM is also clumsy and too long in my opinion. It's hard to say and not especially memorable, given Dell have quite similar models in the same lineup. In the feature support matrix, we get results indicative of an entry-level product. This is not an especially feature-rich display, despite some wins like supporting HDMI 2.1. The monitor only offers borderline refresh compliance and a single overdrive mode experience, with the motion section being one of the weaker aspects to this product. Wide viewing angles are also borderline true. In terms of flickering, I did spot some minor flicker in situations with a wild frame rate fluctuation, though I didn't spot this problem in most gaming scenarios, and when I did see flicker, it wasn't as visible as some of the worst examples I've seen. Pixel inversion, aka scan lines, can also be visible in the worst cases, a common issue with VA LCDs, though the results I saw were extremely faint and much better than other products. Overall, I think the best way to describe the Dell Alienware AW3425DWM is that it's perfectly fine as a budget ultra-wide gaming monitor. When you look across the models available today in this price range, the vast majority use VA LCD panels, and this Dell model is a pretty typical VA showing in terms of performance. It's not going to blow you away. I don't think I'd describe this panel as particularly high quality, but it's not shockingly bad, and Dell have done a reasonable job to optimize what this VA has to offer. The main strength to this VA LCD is its contrast ratio, which is very high at over 4000:1, and this leads to great SDR black levels. Dell have done an okay job of calibrating the screen, so it delivers reasonable accuracy, nothing is hugely out of whack from the factory, and it has a wide color gamut, so the overall color experience is pretty good. Dell have complemented this with an excellent design that is similar to their high-end ultrawides, so it looks like a much more expensive monitor than it really is. There's HDMI 2.1 support, so no refresh rate compromises, and a normal screen curve for this type of panel format. I really like the 34-inch ultra-wide size for gaming. 3440 by 1440 is still a great resolution today, and it's that bit more immersive for single-player gaming than a standard 16 by 9 display. If this is your first ultra-wide monitor, I think you'll be quite happy with how this screen looks. There are some downsides though, largely related to panel speed. VA is just not a fast technology by modern standards, so the motion performance on offer is mediocre, and there's classic VA LCD issues like dark smearing. Dell have tried to improve speed through overdrive optimization, so this monitor is faster than some of the VA ultrawides I tested several years ago, but I think the panel itself is really not capable of much more speed. It falls short of today's standard fast IPS panels in motion clarity, and the 180Hz refresh rate is really pushing it to the limits. VA LCDs have other drawbacks, including below average viewing angles and the potential for minor amounts of flicker and pixel inversion. You can think of this like a min-max situation. VAs give you maximum LCD contrast, but motion performance has been minimized to achieve that. With several pretty significant issues, you might be wondering why I described this monitor as perfectly fine at the start of the conclusion. Well, that's for two reasons: price and competition. The AW3425DWM is relatively cheap, currently priced at just $350 US, and I've seen it on sale for as low as $300 US. Looking at the current ultrawide market, that's a decent price. It's not the outright cheapest, but it's competitive given what Dell offer. The competition in this price range is also almost entirely VA panels, and compared to typical VAs, this Dell model is respectable. I'd love to sit here and point to some great IPS options if you wanted something with a bit more speed, but IPS ultrawides are rare these days because it doesn't seem to be a popular panel to manufacture anymore. This makes this review much less of a VA versus IPS battle and more of a, well, in this price range you have to buy a VA, so what does a modern VA offer? From a comparative standpoint, it's a little disappointing how little these VA LCDs have improved since we reviewed a bunch of them years ago. If you already have a VA LCD ultrawide, there's pretty much no reason to upgrade to an AW3425DWM. The experience will be pretty similar. Pricing hasn't improved by all that much either. The Gigabyte G34WQC I reviewed back in 2020 used a similar VA LCD and it was priced at $400 US. Getting a somewhat better version today for $350 isn't bad given inflation and all that, but price drops for ultrawides haven't been nearly as aggressive as with other LCD gaming monitors. The main shakeup in the ultrawide market has been the replacement of IPS LCDs with OLEDs at the high end. But basically, the AW3425DWM is fine. I'm not going to be raving about this particular monitor, but if you want an ultrawide, if OLEDs are too expensive, the option is to get a VA LCD, and this one seems like a pretty good option using the available panels. So anyway, that's it for this review. If you do want to support Monitors Unboxed and the independent testing that we do, the best way to do that is via our Patreon page. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to the ICC profiles and calibrated settings that we create during these reviews, as well as a bunch of other good stuff like our Discord chat, which has a dedicated monitors channel. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.